Now, we should like to start accepting questions from the audience. As for the questions, as we have notified beforehand, those of you who have registered beforehand and are connected with the teleconference system, those people will be heard with questions first. Now, the operator will be explaining how we will be accepting questions. We will be starting questions and answers session. If you have a question, please press 01 on your telephone. To cancel your question, please press 02. The operator will be assigning who will be asking the question. Now we will introduce to you the first person to ask the question. Please wait for a while. The first person is from Mitsubishi UFJ Morgan Stanley Securities. Nakashima-san, please. Tanaka-sama, please.
Thank you. My name is Tanaka with Mitsubishi UFJ Morgan Stanley. Can you hear my voice? Yes, we hear you, sir. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. I would like to ask two questions. I will ask one question at a time. The first question, I would like to direct this question to Mr. Hiroi, the Senior Executive Vice President of Docomo. You talked about Kabonyu. That's a very straightforward video. Thank you so much for the video presentation. You mentioned that this will be an open program. But what about players like KDDI and SoftBank? What about other carriers? Do you intend to work together and partner with such companies as well? Is that part of your plan? I would appreciate your thoughts. Thank you. Thank you very much. Allow me to respond to your question. Hiroi here. Allow me to respond to your question then. Well, going forward, we would like to build this platform and the service and expand the usage of this type of technology. Now, the ultimate aim is this. Pursuing CO2 emission reduction on a personal basis is not very easy to do. It's not very straightforward. So, to what extent can we contribute to the society? When one uses environmentally friendly services, to what extent can we experience the benefit of those contributions? That is the basis of this Carbon program. So, for all the companies involved, at the end of the day, when they use this service, then we would like to have a yardstick that is common to the society, where they can actually measure the CO2 emission that they're contributing toward. So, if you wish to utilize this type of yardstick and this service, although it might be on a face-by-face basis, we hope that we'll be able to do this on an open basis as much as possible. We believe that that is a possibility. I see. Thank you for that. Thank you for your response. My second question, I would like to ask Mr. Shimada of NTT. I would like to ask Mr. Shimada, the Senior Executive Vice President of NTT. We're looking forward to ION. There are a lot of expectations toward the possible potential introduction of ION. Now, what about the introduction? Can you talk about the progress of introduction of high electricity? Yes, thank you very much for your kind interest. With regard to development of ION, we are actually on schedule. With regard to ION Global Forum, we have been producing white papers, and there has been concrete progress in our work. So at minimum, well, around 2023 or between 2024 or onwards, we believe that a photonics electronics conversion chips device will be utilized. And that's what we like to do. So to be more specific, with the NTT Green Innovation toward 2040, as you see in this envision, from 2026 onwards or so, we hope that we'll be able to introduce network equipments at that juncture. That is the plan that we have. So we hope that you will look forward to this. Thank you very much for your interest. Thank you very much. And if I could ask another additional question, if I may. So this photonics electronics conversion chip, I'm not very well versed in this type of chip, but when you take a look at the carriers and players around the world, are there players, maybe not competition, but some companies that are close to what you're doing in the field of photonics electronics conversion chip device? Well, thank you. Shimada here. Well, with regard to photonics electronic conversion chip, we have not yet seen any companies that have developed something similar to what we have announced. And when it comes to photonics electronic conversion chip, of course, competition, they also believe that photonics will be very important technology going forward. And I'm sure that they'll be tackling this field. Now, in order to commercialize this chip, the manufacturing related know-how, in relation to manufacturing related know-how, with regard to DSP, we have already been producing DSP and the like up until now. So when it comes to photonics electronic conversion chip, mass production would involve not just network equipments, but also involve various processing technology. So you need photonic semiconductor chips involved as well. So therefore, in mass production, with regard to mass production, first of all, the best members of the ION Global Forum, such as Intel, Sony, together with such companies of the Global Forum, and consider that 70 members are part of this forum. So together with various partners, we would like to develop a robust production and manufacturing system. Thank you. Very clear. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
ありがとうございました。
Mr. Tanaka, thank you very much. We will accept the next question. The next question is from Daiwa Securities, Mr. Ando. Mr. Ando, over to you, please. Hello, this is Ando speaking. Can you hear me? Yes, we hear you. Please go ahead. Thank you. I also have two questions. My first question is, yes, about ION again. Over this 1 year time or so, in ION development, has there been technological breakthrough that you have seen that you can introduce to us? Any such a breakthrough? And those equipment makers who may want to use ION, not necessarily just network makers, but more broadly, any potent viable equipment makers, are they strengthening their efforts in this field? Any movements that you can introduce to us? Ando-san, thank you very much. First of all, any breakthrough over the past 1 year or so? Breakthrough. Actually, several years ago in the laboratories of NTT, in the photonics electronics convergence chip was made. This is the true breakthrough. And as was announced in Nature journal, the article was the starting point there. In reality, making chips using photonics, no one was successful in the world. This was the big breakthrough. And then, as we said, the related partners. The other day, with NEC and with Fujitsu, with domestic makers, we have been talking throughout. And when the chip was made, we can embed these chips into the white box type equipments and devices. For that timing, we have been coordinating mutually. So as far as we're concerned, we do not intend to limit just to domestic vendors. We want overseas vendors to come into the photonics electronics convergence chips. We want servers made using this technology. We want to build relationships. Time may seem to be available, but in actuality, time is limited. So we need to be on a high pace. Thank you very much. And then my second question, to further step in, my question is, looking at this chart, the carbon neutrality chart, this is a very bold chart. And as an estimate or forecast, very impactful. Out of this, ion percentage is 45% or so. This is a very high percentage, high proportion by ion. So my question is, the image of this percentage has to be achieved. Only then can you become carbon neutral. Or does this mean that there are a lot of moving factors? And basically, the ultimate goal is carbon neutrality, and the breakdown ratio in between could be pretty variable. There could be various scenarios to achieve carbon neutrality. What is the field? On the next page, maybe we can look at the next page. That will be better for explanation. This is the curve showing the electricity consumption. As of 2030, about 80% will be from renewable energy. 80% of the electricity used will be from renewables, and ion will be yet at an early phase of introduction. And renewables in 2030, we have been planning from the past. About half of the renewables will be from our own plants, our own facilities, to be built by anode energy. We will cover from our sources, and the other half of the renewables will be procured from outside. For instance, we will use trading firms that sell renewable energy. And as of this stage, renewables are already 80% of the power consumed. And the rest, the 20%, how are we going to contain and the electricity consumption instead of increasing electricity consumption and contain? And then out of the renewables, half are to be produced ourselves, but it is possible we will generate more ourselves. But we can't tell the electricity environment 10 years from now yet. But already, for example, in Europe, for example, renewables already is much more greater, and the costs are much less compared to LNG and coal-powered electricity. And the other day, from August, from METI in Japan, we heard that in Japan in 2030, energy cost, the cheapest cost will be solar-derived energy. That kind of calculation started coming in Japan too. And going into 2030, the various energy costs can become different, can change. And the government also has and will be putting in measures to reinforce renewables. So what are going to be the levels by various sources of energy we need to consider for us? And when we have more renewable energies generated by us, as Mr. Takama explained earlier, we will also be providing power to customers outside too. And we will be integrating various overall systems, and the total cost will come down. And this business of renewables in itself can also grow. Ion, steadily we will grow and will be the core of this vision. But at the same time, renewables will also grow as a business as well. This is also the key to the vision this time.
そうすると、例えば
If that is the case, for example, ion and renewables, the percentage of the two by 2040 could be different. Is that in your mind? And at the end of the day, this is the picture that you have in mind, bearing in mind all the aforementioned items. That is what I'm imagining. So may I take it that you have many different simulations in the back of this exercise? Well, ideally speaking, in 2040, for example, hopefully the overall power consumption should be coming down even further. At least we want to bring this down to the current level, to the level that we are showing you on this page. So this is part of our announcement, and we're going to be making full-out effort towards this vision. Okay, thank you very much. That is clear. Thank you. Thank you very much. That was Mr. Ando. We'd now like to go on to the next question, please. Next question will be from Nomura Securities, Mr. Masuno. Mr. Masuno, please take the floor. Thank you very much. I would like to also ask two questions. My first question is about the 45% reduction based on ion technology. So if you're going to have a contribution from ion to the extent of 45%, then at the phase 3 of ion, I think for example, you need to reduce power consumption by 100 through photonics electronic convergence chip. Unless you have that chip, it will be difficult to achieve, I would imagine, which means that around 2030, phase 1, 2, 3, or the phase 3 transceiver and chip, and also in-chip convergence. So in-chip convergence should have to be commercialized at that juncture. And that should spread after 2030, based on which you'll be able to achieve 45% reduction based on ion technology. So is that the timeline that you have in mind? You mentioned that you talked about in 2005 you introduced this. So that by introduction of equipment to it, I think you're talking about phase 1. So can you perhaps share with us the roadmap? Because in order to achieve 45% reduction, you have to go through phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. So can you please share with us the roadmap? Thank you for your question, Shimada here. So at around 2030, hopefully, as you mentioned, hopefully they would like to transition to phase 3 as you just outlined. So this time, we're talking about 2040. Based on our simulation, among the entity group's equipment, roughly 50% of the equipment at NTT Group should be covered with ion technology. So that is the assumption that we have. So at the time of 2040, remaining 50% will not have transitioned to ion-based technology equipment. Of course, if we could accelerate this pace, if that is possible, then the effect of ion could be spread much earlier. This will help to improve the services. And of course, in terms of speed, it could be improved. And so in terms of networks architecture, everything will change. So therefore, the simulation that we're sharing with you at this time is that 50% of technology will be based on ion by 2040. So that is the assumption that we have introduced for this exercise. I see that. If I may confirm, so inter-chip conversion, which is phase 2, what is the timeline for commercialization of this? Well, with regard to, again, in terms of technological development for ion as a whole, as far as the schedule is concerned, I hope that on a separate occasion, we'll be able to explain more details at a separate occasion. So if you could ask for your patience a little while longer. Thank you. Point taken. My second question is this. 45% reduction through renewables. That is the point I would like to ask in my second question. There's a presentation of anode energy earlier. And in the presentation, you talked about the procurement of renewables will increase from 400 million to 3.8 billion going forward. Now, among 3.8 billion, 50% will be based on your own facilities, and the remaining 50% will be procured elsewhere. Is that the case? Which means the 1.9 billion kilowatt hour will be sourced by yourself. So what about investment to cover for this self-generation cost? Self-generation, how much investment will this be? I think in the midterm strategy, you talked about some of the energy related simulation, but in terms of the investment that is required, can you talk about the scale of the investment on a time series? I would appreciate the investment that you're envisioning. Thank you. This is Shimada here. I would like to respond and explain this matter. So 3.8 billion kilowatt hour that was mentioned. Well, this is power that will be produced by anode energy. That's roughly 50% of the whole. As for others, roughly 3.8, some 3 billion in 2030, more than 3 billion will have to be covered. So therefore, with this, we'll be able to cover roughly 80% of the whole. So in order to raise to this level, based on our simulation, 450 billion yen investment will probably be required, which means that on an annual basis, 45 billion yen will be required on per annum basis. Now, as far as the cost for investment is concerned, roughly speaking, in terms of the power that we source, I think we'll be able to cover that with the sourcing cost. So we'll be using cash for this investment. As far as the cash is concerned, we hope leverage third parties' capital as well. But in principle, as far as investment is concerned, going forward, we'll have to consider compressing the investment for NTT Group as a whole. So with regard to 50 billion in investment, we hope that we'll be able to absorb the cost. So once we're able to absorb that cost, and then cost is not likely to increase. And to the contrary, the amount that we would be paid out to power companies in the past will be coming down going forward. So that being the case, as I mentioned earlier, in 2030, we believe that roughly the cost will increase by 10 billion thereabouts. But if renewable subsidies, renewable levy, this went up in 2021. But if the charge, so the assumption is based on the increase in cost and the charges for renewables. That is the assumption that we have introduced. So for the vision as a whole, we have not factored in we have not expected any significant impact from cost. So if I could confirm, you mentioned 10 billion in cost increase as a result of renewables. So more than 3 billion in cost of renewable procurement will be done. Is that the reason? Well, we're talking about overall. No, that's the overall. Also, you're talking about overall. I see, not just renewables. Okay. And also, in 2030, the Natural Resource Energy Agency made a simulation. If their simulation is correct, then NTT Energy mentioned that in 2030, 3.20. If you replace the power that you're purchasing right now, then actually, if you replace this, I think you should be able to translate that into profit. Is that not the case? Mr. Masuno, Mr. Masuno, I think you have touched upon a very good point. Right now, the Natural Resources and Energy Agency, they're simulating the cost. They're talking about the production cost. They're talking about the manufacturing cost. The manufacturing cost, production cost will be coming down because of Japan. Connection to the grids. There are a lot of challenges pertaining to connection to the grids. So that being the case, that cost, who will be bearing that cost going forward, that type of discussion will probably take place going forward. So ideally speaking, overall picture should be coming down, hopefully, inclusive of all these variables, and the cost should be on a downward trend. That would be the ideal scenario. But the thing is that we cannot make a general statement at this juncture. Mr. Takama, is my response correct? Yes, thank you. If I may, Takama from NTT Energy, I would like to make a few comments. As was already explained by Mr. Shimada right now, it is true that with regard to solar power production cost will be coming down, and there's a possibility that the solar power production cost will be less expensive compared to LNG. But then, as you're aware, in the case of solar power, they cannot produce power at nighttime. So this requires power to cover the nighttime. So, for example, if they could utilize a storage battery where they could store battery, well, they could cover that through storage batteries. But in certain cases, they might utilize thermal power plants. Power plants that can easily switch off and off. Using thermal power plants where switches could be easily turned off, on and off, maybe they might use that as an option. So when you consider that, to what extent will the costs be coming down? That is something that really needs to be worked out. There are a lot of different factors out there, and I think you have to take into consideration these many different variables and factors when you consider the cost of solar. And also, when it comes to renewables, it's been said that renewable costs could be maybe 0.3, less than 1 yen per kilowatt hour. But then, going forward, renewables certificate usage should be increasing. I think there's a high ability that certificate will be increasing in relation to the renewables. So that being the case, there are a lot of different variables that are part of the picture. So can we say that 3.8 billion kilowatt hour worth of cost reduction could be achieved? That is not a straightforward formula. I see, if I may. So that being the case, so the certificate would be a factor that could raise the price. So that is why we are anticipating possible cost increase of 10 billion yen. Thank you for your understanding.
はい、ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much. Mr. Masuno, thank you for your questions. Let us move on to the next person. The next person will be from Credit Suisse Securities, Mr. Eguchi. Mr. Eguchi, please. Can you hear me? This is Eguchi speaking. Yes, we hear you. Thank you. Mr. Shimada, first of all, you disclosed your targets this time, but I have one question simply about the assumption. Your criteria is 2 degrees or less criteria, right? SBT part, we used to have WB 2 degrees, but this time in reviewing our vision, we revised to 1.5 degrees criteria, and we made the application 2 days ago. So 1.5 degrees criteria is used. Let's say if under the scenario of 3 to 4 degrees, what will be the factors affecting the target? For instance, renewables and ions you talked about, but what factor will be affected most if the scenario changes? And you also talked about the base stations too. Mr. Eguchi, many apologies. What did you say? What of the scenario? What was the question? The carbon neutrality contribution factors can be ion, base stations, and renewables. I think these were the factors you raised. So the contribution factors, I think, were these 3. And when the scenario changes, which factor requires review? I think applies to every one of them. For renewables, for example, like grid connection may become difficult. And even today, there are bids and solar panels, and the power plants may exist, but in the bidding, the grid connection routes are questioned, and we cannot necessarily be in the bidding process, cannot participate in the bid. So for overall power business, there are risks. But the government is saying that as a whole, there should be a shift to renewable energy. The government is aiming for carbon neutrality 2050 and 46% CO2 reduction 2040. And to this direction, the government is going to set up the environment we expect. And as a business operator, we need to appeal where there are problems to overcome the issues. And as for ION, first of all, we are yet at the stage of R&D. We need to make sure that the costs will be lower than today's costs levels of the equipment, or the performance of the equipment should be better than today. It's not just simply about the energy efficiency. Telecommunications and processing functions also must rise as well. And which means there are development challenges. And for energy conservation, with steady technology developments, we will move ahead. For example, base stations, sleeps. Docomo is thinking about this a lot. We need to move ahead steadily with these efforts and overcome what we need to overcome. Yes, there are risks in each of the factors. There are respective risks, but our mission is to take up the challenge and clear all of them. Thank you. And secondly, I have a question to Mr. Hiroi. This time, 2030, carbon neutrality, accelerate carbon neutrality timing. And you say green 5G. And you will be purchasing more renewables as the 5G subscription increase. So business contribution and solving social issue are interconnected. They're related. So pretty impressive in my mind. But my confirmation is carbon neutrality acceleration to 2030 timing. You have a much different target now. What makes it possible to achieve at this timing? Was there any kind of change that allowed you to achieve carbon neutrality early at 2030? 2030, yes. We originally had SPD Scope 1 and 2. Within Scope 1 and 2, compared to 2018, 50% reduction, we've said. This used to be our goal. In 2030, we will become neutral. And this is the new goal. And as far as we're concerned, the current environmental issues is receiving more attention from the society. There's more interest from the society. Against this background, we need to accelerate our efforts as a company. This was the biggest part at the fundamental level. And secondly, the NTT Energy Vision, out of the whole NTT group, we want to become carbon neutral 2040 as a group by NTT Group. And looking at the equipment mix of NTT Group, where there's a lot of energy consumption, that is the data centers and also our base stations, the access networks and equipments use and consume a lot of electricity. And the servers within the network equipments use a lot of electricity. And electricity poles, East and West have a lot of equipments like that use a lot of electricity between NTT East, West, and Docomo. And we need to move ahead with these companies early so that the whole group can achieve carbon neutrality in 2040. I see. Thank you very much.
Lastly, about renewable energy, I would like to ask a question for Mr. Takama of Anode Energy. So, group as a whole is aiming for carbon neutral, and they changed their policy. I hope that I'm not offending you, but you were a by player. You were not a main player, but now you are on the center stage. That's the impression that we have with regard to your company. So, as a result, maybe the way in which you curate your business may change because now you're on center stage. It probably cannot be an extension of business as usual. So in terms of organization, what transformation, what changes are you envisioning at your company, inclusive of the possible structure of the group? And also with regard to your business, are you going to be further strengthening your partnership with other operating companies of NTT Group? Can you please share with us your policy for the next 5 to 10 years? Can you share with us some targets or goals you have in that time range? I would appreciate it. Mr. Takama, please. Okay, thank you for your question. So you mentioned that we're no longer a by player, but we are now on center stage. Yes, indeed, he is. Yes, the company Anode Energy is now the main character. Thank you very much. I will take that to my heart. Well, up until now, through FIT, feed-in tariff system, we have been building our power generation facilities based on the feed-in tariff system. That was the prevailing situation. But now that we have the numbers in front of us, we felt the feed-in tariff system alone would be sufficient. So therefore, we have to pursue the non-FIT scenario as well. We have to accelerate development of the non-feed-in tariff scenario going forward. But then, naturally, this is something we cannot do on our own. So this requires working with partners. We would like to pursue development together with various partners. That is what we have in mind. To be more specific, when it comes to solar power, feed-in tariff system FIT, the term and the period of FIT is now already over. So from now on, no new permissions and approvals will be made in relation to FIT-based solar power production, solar power plants rather. So therefore, many companies that have produced many FIT-based solar power generation plants. Together with such companies, we would like to work toward developing non-FIT-based solar power plants. we hope to create such an ecosystem which will enable such partnership. Now, with regard to the ecosystem, if this new ecosystem could function well, then we believe that green energy such as solar power and one of high quality could be produced at great volume. Also, there was a question about structure and organization. From this point onwards, we will further enhance our organization and structure so that I hope that you look forward to it. We thank you for your expectation and your interest. Thank you.
江口様ありがとう。
Thank you very much. That was Mr. Eguchi. This will be the final question for this session. Next question from SMBC Nikko Securities, Mr. Kikuchi. Mr. Kikuchi, please take the floor. Thank you very much. Kikuchi here. If I could ask about ION. In 2040, the usage of ION will be roughly 50%. That's what you mentioned. So let us assume that you were able to bring this timeline forward. Then is there possibly a scenario whereby ION usage could be as 100%? In 2050, maybe you'll be able to achieve 100% at that juncture. If you're very confident about ION, then maybe you should not invest in renewables. That's what I feel. Of course, it could be a two-pronged approach. But it seems as though these are two contradictory elements as part of your plan. So this goes back to the earlier question by Mr. Ando. I think that's what he wanted to probably ask in his question. That was the impression that I have. So how do you strike a balance? Is this balance appropriate? If ION really spreads throughout the community, then it might seem contradictory for your company and for the group company to be involved in the power business to begin with. So what are your thoughts? Thank you. This is Shimada here. I will let you respond to this question. I do not believe that there is contradiction at all. With regard to ION, the growth of ION itself and the growth of our power business, electricity business, they should be compatible. They should be pursued at the same time. So we're talking about 2030, and the renewables at the time of 2030 should be increasing. And at that juncture, it could be that we should consider something beyond the next 10 years. We will be expanding ION after the expansion of renewables. At this moment, we're aiming for carbon neutral in 2040. That is the part of our announcement. In the case of Microsoft, they are talking about carbon negative by 2030, for example. So there are some companies who are interested in carbon negative. In 2040, we're aiming for carbon neutral, but we do not believe that is the end of our initiative. So around 2030 or so, I think we should be coming up with some sort of a vision. Maybe the timeline could be earlier than that. But when we consider the intensity of climate change, the discussion could arise about accelerating such efforts. So therefore, we need to observe the social challenges and strike the appropriate balance and go forward with our initiative. So that being the case, we want to make sure that we do both. That is our resolve. Thank you very much. Hiroi here. I would like to add to what was just mentioned. This is Hiroi here. So with ION, power consumption could be reduced. As I explained earlier on my end, yes, we will be introducing Docomo Denki, a power business of our own, and green power will be provided to our customer base. So with this green power supply could expand as a result. So in many ways, I think we'll be able to tackle this area. So that is how we would like to structure our business portfolio. Thank you.
Mr. Kikuchi, thank you very much. With this, we should like to close the presentation and questions about the new environment and energy vision. Thank you very much.